You can start.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. So this is afternoon in France, this is late morning in Brazil. Welcome to all our friends to discuss today's topic on protection of the Amazon and development. My name is Agnès Hallossserie. I'm the director of the Biodiversity program at IDDRI, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations. So we'll start with an introduction by the ambassador of Brazil in France, Ricardo, Neiva, Tavares, and by IDDRI's executive director, Sébastien Treyer. Then we'll have we'll set the scene with an intervention by two Brazilian experts, Dr. Carlos Nobre and Dr. Raoni, who will tell us what is going on in the Amazon forest. Then we'll discuss the political response to that with Ambassador Corrêa do Lago, Deputy Minister for Climate, Environment and Energy from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. And we'll have the outlook of the civil society with Adriana Ramos from the Instituto Socioambiental. And finally, we'll dive into the question of financing the protection of the Amazon with my colleague from IDDRI, Juliette, Landry. So all speakers will deliver their intervention together in a row. That should be about 1 hour. And we'll have a dedicated time for questions and answers. So for the participants, please use the Q&R button in the Microsoft Teams interface. So you can ask your questions throughout the webinar, and I will convey them for the panel at the end of the presentations. Thank you, everyone. And Ambassador Ricardo, Neiva, Tavares, it's your time to speak.
Well, thank you very much, dear panelists, dear participants. I'm truly delighted to open this high-level discussion about the sustainable development of the Amazon region. We'd like to thank IDDRI for this partnership and for their invaluable contributions in making this webinar happen. I also extend my heartfelt appreciation to the panelists who have agreed to share their thoughts with us. Today in Brazil, we celebrate the Amazon Day, a date established in 2007 to raise awareness about the importance of protecting this biome and promoting sustainable development for its people. It's therefore no coincidence that we chose this 5th of September for our event. But this dialogue is by no means a symbolic gesture to mark the Amazon Day. It's a demonstration of Brazil's commitment to fight deforestation and ensure dignity and prosperity for the peoples of the Amazon, in particular indigenous peoples and local communities. Responding to the threats of climate change and biodiversity loss has the highest priority in President Lula's government. Tackling deforestation and environmental crime, two key pillars of Brazil's environmental policy, is back at the heart of government decision-making. Brazil is also conscious that in order to be effective in this endeavor, we need to ensure a coordinated response with our Amazonian neighbors. The Amazon Summit, which was held in Bele less than a month ago, is a direct response to this need. We have the chance to hear more about those two endeavors today. I'm convinced that we have good reasons to celebrate this Amazon Day. Of course, we also have many challenges ahead in order to fulfill our sustainable development aspirations. This is why I invite each one of you to be an active participant in this dialogue. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you a very fruitful debate.
Thank you very much. Sébastien, would you be kind and give us a small words too?
Thank you very much, Agnès. And really, I wanted to thank the Brazilian Embassy in Paris for this opportunity to co-organize an extremely important debate. Excellencies, Señores Embajadores, directors, colleagues, and friends, it's really my introductory words are mostly going to say why I think it's of such an importance for the Amazon itself, but also for the global debate on climate biodiversity and financing sustainable development to discuss the Amazon Summit and its follow-up. So I will mainly stress that and emphasize this importance and relevance. First, of course, I think it's very important that Brazil is and will be playing a major key role in global governance this year and at least the next 2 years with the G20 presidency and COP30 in Manaus on climate. I want to stress the fact that it's really important that Brazil can promote multilateral cooperation and play a role of mediation between North and South, between East and West. And that's very welcome. We need that extremely badly, but also on substance. The innovations, the policy instruments, the policy proposals, the cooperation types of instruments that Brazil is going to propose are going to matter a lot for the G20 on financing sustainable development and the reform of the global financial architecture, but also on COP30 for climate. In that framework, of course, the other thing is that we are discussing the forests, the Amazon basin and their population and how they can reach sustainable development, where climate and biodiversity are intertwined crises. The implementation of the global biodiversity framework decided at COP16 and of the Paris Agreement is very important. And that should be done in the framework of Agenda 2030. And we are going to have the midterm review of Agenda 2030, but it should not be lost in translation. This is a very important political agenda for all countries. This is why I insist so much on putting all these issues in the framework of also financing sustainable development. Few elements that I think are extremely important what I think was very present in the Amazon summit was the idea to put climate protection and biodiversity protection at the heart of a sustainable development project for the populations and in particular the indigenous people and the local communities. And I think this is a vision that is extremely important, but that we should not by that overlook the difficulties about agricultural development in the region, the development of the infrastructure and how that can be made compatible. So the discussions on how the protection of the Amazon is both a condition and an outcome of local development is extremely interesting as an experiment, but also, of course, for the Amazon itself and the populations of the Amazon. And really the discussions in the framework of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization is a very interesting discussion in that regard. To strike a fine balance between development and living in harmony with nature is really something that I think is both can be inspired by the proposals by indigenous people and local communities for their own needs in those areas, but also there can be lots of innovation that are very interesting to be brought back also to the discussion on how do we finance the investment needs for sustainable development in other regions. And that I think is extremely important. There are many people looking at the Amazon Fund as a very innovative and interesting instrument. Not to say that everything is functioning well. I'm not a good analyst of that, but I think this is really important that we think of how these discussions today also take place and can be integrated in the overall discussion on reforming the international financial architecture. My last point is to say the Amazon Summit is also very important because of the emphasis on regional cooperation between governments, also between scientists, how the cooperation between science experts or between IPLs, indigenous people, and their civil society organizations. This is very important for the resilience to political shocks in one country or the other, but also for efficient and coherent implementation of global and national commitments at the regional scale. And this is also lessons we can draw from the Amazon Summit. So you see, I probably have too many angles through which I would like to approach this discussion. I am not able to stay online for the whole conversation, but I'm really extremely interested to hear about the results of this dialogue and really to feed international conversations that are extremely difficult and for which these discussions of the Amazon Summit are extremely central. So thanks a lot again to the embassy, to the ambassadors for making that possible, to the experts and personalities in the panel who have accepted to intervene, and to the audience, because we believe also your questions will bring a lot of insights to the conversation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Sébastien. And then with the indulgence of my panelists, I will have to do a small shift of the agenda because I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Corrêa de Lago now, and we'll discuss the scientific perspective maybe after, but we already got just a bit behind schedule, and I know you have other commitments, so yeah, we would like you to have the opportunity to say everything you have to tell us about the outcome of the summit and how you see things going forward from there. So please, Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I thank IDDRI for organizing this and the Embassy of Brazil in Paris. I send a very special abraço for my colleague, Ricardo Neiva Tavares, the new ambassador of Brazil in France, and to Luis Andrade, who is a very close friend and who has been working with these teams for many years, including with me. And I say hello to Raoni also, because I hadn't seen him before. Hi, Raoni. I'm going to try to mention some of the issues. Sébastien raised many important points, and I'm going to cover a little of it. But the fact is that there is the summit, the Belém summit, is in a certain way a surprise because most people had not heard about the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization. In fact, even in Brazil, very few people know of its existence, and it is the only international organization that has that is in Brazil. It's in Brasilia. But this treaty had a limited approach of cooperation without a more contemporary view of the issues regarding the Amazon. And I think this is the main point that President Lula wanted when he proposed the summit, is that we have to get together to have the most contemporary information, science, business, everything on the Amazon has become different, has gained a new urgency also because of the advances of science. And by the way, I salute here, he has not arrived yet, but Professor Carlos Nobre, who has been essential in this effort to see the importance of working on the Amazon in a rational way. So this meeting was not only to somehow give a new dimension to the organization, to the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, but also to make it infinitely more dynamic. And we started the preparation with a very large seminar in which we wanted to hear from the local populations, from the local governments, from the NGOs, from the Brazilian institutions such as the Federal Police or the IBAMA, to hear from all of them, how do they see the Amazon today and what were the main challenges. And so we tried to put all these issues into the declaration. But obviously, as you know, a declaration of 8 countries is negotiated between 8 countries and obviously does not include exactly what one country or the other one wants. So the result of Belém, the declaration, I believe, is a very important document because it introduces some elements that were not being dealt at national level between these countries on some very key issues. I believe that the first issue that I want to call the attention is on the problem that was pointed as the biggest problem in the Amazon, which is organized crime. So we have established now a central for all the countries of the region in Manaus to work together against organized crime. We are very afraid as Brazil that there could be a spillover effect in a very successful campaign in controlling deforestation, in controlling illegal mining, etc., because it can spill over to the neighbors. And the same thing, obviously, worries the neighbors. So there was a very strong agreement on that sense that I believe is very important. The other is that in all our countries, including in Brazil, you have some very nationalistic visions that are quite present and that believe that this concern about the Amazon is a great conspiracy or a worry of people that don't defend the interests of the country. So we noticed that there was a resistance regarding science, including, and so we decided to strengthen the scientific capacity and the strength, in fact, of the regional science by creating a kind of intergovernmental panel modeled a bit like the IPCC of the countries of the Amazon. This is not that it goes against the IPCC or whatever, but it is essentially to stimulate the universities. We have lots of scientists, we have lots of intelligence in all the countries of the Amazon, and to bring this together and to show to the populations, to the politicians, and to the business that there is a science there, and this science is a warning of the importance of doing the right thing in the Amazon. And for that, in that context, I believe that it was a great thing too, that we could include in the declaration 4 times, by the way, the concept of the tipping points that, by the way, were created by, I believe the first to publish this was Carlos Nobre. So the idea that we are all united to avoid the acceleration of the tipping point in the Amazon is a very, very important dimension also of this meeting. There are other decisions too in the declaration, as you can see, but the declaration is so long that nobody read it. So it's a very tricky thing. And obviously the press concentrated on the 2 things that were not achieved in principle, which I believe everybody understands rationally how difficult it would have been to put, which was the issue of oil and the issue of zero deforestation by 2030 for all the countries of the region. Some of the countries showed difficulty, that they had no capacity to be able to declare that they could stop deforestation by 2030. So this also is a sign of something that we have to work together and to cooperate together to make sure that we can later, maybe next year or in the following year, by the COP30, to have all the countries agreeing to stop deforestation by 2030. I believe that another very important point that we treated is the issue of cities, because people, it's obvious that the local populations, the indigenous people and the traditional populations are extremely important in the Amazon. But as we all know, there is a concern also about the life of the people that have other activities in the Amazon. And there, a bit touching on what Sébastien said, I believe that there are 2 very good things that are happening in Brazil. First is a very strong development of economic theories specifically for the Amazon that is being developed by some brilliant Brazilian economists. And this is extremely important because we do not want to eliminate what works and what has already happened, but we obviously want to stop the continuation of the mistakes that are huge, as we all know. Then, as I mentioned already with the police, There is the illegality thing, which is another dimension. One thing is to do the wrong thing. Another thing is to commit crimes, which are also happening, like the invasion of indigenous land or of protected lands, which is something that Raoni will talk about, that they are doing a fabulous job at the Ministry of the Environment. But I want to stress very much this issue of cities, because the Amazon biome has around 16 million people. There is a usual, people normally use the number of the legal Amazon, which is a concept that was developed in Brazil that is not related to the biome. It's larger than the biome. But the Amazon biome has around 16 million people. And of these 16 million people, more than 10 million live in cities of more than 100,000 people. So cities are absolutely essential. So the quality of life in cities, the sustainability in cities, and the attraction of cities will be an extremely important element in the control of illegalities in the Amazon. So with all that, very shortly, I can tell you that this was somehow a first step in the preparation of COP30 that will happen in Belém. Not that the issue of deforestation and the issue of the Amazon is an issue that is treated directly in the convention, in the Climate Change Convention or in the Paris Accord, but the symbolism of it is huge. And in the case of Brazil, it is a very important source of emissions. So if worldwide it's less than 10% of the emissions, deforestation, in the case of Brazil, before the intervention of the Ministry of the Environment coordinating all the ministries in this government, it was 50% of our emissions. So I think it is a great example that Brazil is giving, that is a country that is talking openly about its biggest problem. It's very interesting because in climate change negotiations, I always say that people are always experts in other people's emissions. We are talking about the main issue that we have, and we are going to deal with the main issue, and we're going to invite the world to come to the place that symbolizes this issue. And I believe that this is a very courageous step that President Lula has taken. And we were very happy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in coordination with many other ministries, apart from the Ministry of the Environment, to be able to organize the Amazon Summit and to see the results of it. And thank you so much for organizing this event.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. So I see a hand raised, but we will try to keep the questions in writing. So please, if you have questions, don't hesitate to use the question and answer button. And maybe Ambassador Corrêa de Lago, thank you again for your presentation. I know you will have to leave soon, more or less, but if you have specific questions, you may also be able to address them in writing before you leave. So yeah, thank you for that. So I think you paved the way for Mr. Raoni Rajão intervention by calling to him, and so the purpose here is for Mr. Rajão to take us back to the ground, I would say, and to tell us what the scientific monitoring tells us about the status and trends of deforestation, of those different drivers that the ambassador just mentioned, and where you are at also in terms of developing policies, at least at the national level in Brazil. So please, Mr. Rajão, you have the floor, and I think if you show slides, you should have you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. It's or good morning, depending on the country. It's very nice to be here with you. It's a real pleasure. I'm going to share my screen. You just confirm if you can see my PowerPoint. Can you see it? Fantastic.
Yes, it's all good.
Okay. So as mentioned by Ambassador Corrêa do Lago, the Cúpula da Amazônia has been indeed a major success, especially because we have been able in the region to mobilize action and to mobilize attention in relation to the conservation of the forest to avoid the tipping point. So it's basically, just to add to his words, I would say that we had a little bit of a Rio 92 moment in the Amazon basin, whereby broader declaration without mechanisms for actions have been turned into a monitoring system, a monitoring mechanism. So the IPCC for the Amazon, and also a set of targets. And of course, since Brazil has been leading politically this process, it's very important for Brazil to also lead by example. And the action plan for prevention and control of deforestation, the Amazon, the PPCDAM, is that plan, is that action that shows that it is indeed possible to reach significant reductions in deforestation. So I'm going to be presenting here how the plan has been put together and also some of its preliminary results. So first of all, it's very important to highlight that the action plan to prevent deforestation in the Amazon is not a plan of the Minister of the Environment alone. It's a plan of the government, of the Brazilian government as a whole. That's why its political leadership lies in the Chief of Staff, which is under the President Lula, which by its turn has been decisively paying a lot of attention to this agenda and also giving his weight to the importance of reducing deforestation. And then there is a structure which is an executive subcommittee, which is then led by the Minister of Environment. And it is in this executive subcommittee where you have the different ministries involved. So we have agriculture, we have defense, we have also industries, we have also finance, indigenous peoples, and so on. So it's very important to highlight that it is a collective construction. It's not something done by one ministry alone. And to put in the words which are often repeated by Minister Marina, it is about transversality across agenda and across ministries. And also it has invited members, so other ministries which play an important role here. I would like to highlight, for instance, the Minister of Transport, which also it's very important for them to have a role in here, as well as members from academia, civil society, and the private sector. And stemming from PPCDAM, we have a federative articulation group where we have the possibility to articulate with both states and municipalities. And indeed, today is the day of the Amazon. So it's not a coincidence that we are dealing with this topic here in this event. And it's also a day in which President Lula is going to present different actions for the Amazon, including strengthening its collaboration with the municipalities in the Amazon. And also there is a monitoring and evaluation group in which academia and civil society are going to play an important role. So with the parts, the construction process departs from an analysis of the causes of deforestation. So that's why our cooperation with science is so important. So we strive very strongly to develop a policy which is evidence-based, which is science-based. And that's why one of the first moves in developing the plans for deforestation control in the different biomes is actually putting together a scientific seminar in which the latest evidence showing what are the causes and the consequences of deforestation are shown. That had led us to a problem diagnostics, to a series of objectives to be laid out, and also a series of actions, of lines of actions, which then led to indicator and goals, which are then going to be monitored in the future. So we had monthly meetings with secretaries of environment of the Amazon. So this cooperation of the states has been very important. And the technical seminar that I just mentioned, and a public consultation in which we have more than 500 individual contributions, hundreds of pages of submitted documents from different institutions, and also 83 different organizations, individuals contributing to this process. So the final result is a plan organized in 4 main axes with specific goals, which involve the support of sustainable production activities. It's not only about fining and fighting against deforestation, putting people in jail and issuing fines. It's very important to change the logic and the process for the creation of economic activities in the Amazon towards more sustainable options. Of course, we also need to reinforce monitoring and environmental control, not only from IBAMA, which are basically the forest rangers, but also with the federal police and also with other parts of government, which have an important role in monitoring in eventual crimes related to deforestation, including, for instance, financial crimes or sanitary crimes. Also, it's very important to advance on lands and territorial ordering. So we're talking about here to ensure the protection of non-designated public lands. We have around 100 million hectares of non-designated lands in the Amazon, which must find a designation, for instance, as protected areas or as forest concessions for sustainable timber extraction. Also, we need to expand and strengthen the management of those protected areas. So it's very important to reinforce them and to align, and this final point is also very important, to align large-scale enterprises with an infrastructure project with the deforestation reduction targets. So it's no use to have some very important action taking place, for instance, within the Ministry of Environment, if you have some planning taking place in the Amazon, which basically are going to attract more deforestation. And finally, we need economic and normative instruments to align and to support those different actions, which in the end had 192 lines of actions and 141 targets with indicators and key actors. So we are already implementing many of those actions as the plan has been launched, which basically have led to a strengthening of law enforcement actions with an increase of 173% in the number of fines, 123% in the number of embargoes, 254% in the destruction of equipment, and 100% in the seizures, including the seizure of cattle, which is very important since cattle is usually the first economic activity, cattle ranching, which moves into the forested areas. And when you take away cattle in areas which have been illegally deforested, especially protected areas, we are signaling very strongly to the foresters that the crime does not pay. Also, another action which have been happening, which is very important here, is the greening of rural credit. So we basically managed to change, after almost 10 years, the set of rules that established, for instance, the condition to give loans to farmers, making them more stringent, and including, for instance, embargoes, not only federal embargoes, but also state-level embargoes. And also, we have introduced incentives for environmental regularization inside Plano Safra, which is the environmental plan, which is basically the main tool for providing credit for the agricultural sector in Brazil. And also, we have done partnerships with state-level environmental agencies, especially strengthening the rural environmental registry, and also, for instance, working with them to identify and punish by suspending the rural environmental registry the farms with deforestation after 2018. And also, we have been implementing Floresta Mais program, which is the largest payments for ecosystem service program in the world at the moment. It's around 100 million US dollars for direct payments to farmers, and also for the restoration of agricultural of farmlands. And this has already led to some important results. So in July, for instance, we had a reduction of 66% of deforestation in relation to the same periods of last year. And when you take the other deforestation from January to July, we had a reduction of 42% in comparison to the same period of last year. And this has been a major change, because as we took offers on the 1st of January, we were taking, we had in our hands a growing deforestation trend. So for instance, if you look at the deforestation that happened between August to December 2022, it was 54% higher than the same period of last year. So if we haven't done nothing, probably we would be seeing some much higher deforestation rates in the current year. So what are the key challenges now? First is to keep building political consensus with states and municipalities. If you don't have, if you don't work closer to them, it's going to be very difficult to maintain this level of pressure and this level of actions against deforestation. It's very important to maintain deforestation control policies high in the agenda. That's something we have been working on, and with the full support of the president. Also, and this is an important point here, which has been mentioned previously, even though briefly, that we need new financial mechanisms for private and public sector based on deforestation targets and policy deliverables. So we're talking about here green bonds, which, by the way, the Brazilian government is just issuing $2 billion in West bonds, which are going to be managed by the climate funds, which is managed by the Ministry of Environment. Sustainability-linked loans for companies, which also needs to be better monitored. Blended finance, embedding payment for ecosystem service, for instance, and also doing so with independent audits based on universal soil and cattle traceability. So it's very important also to make sure that we all have the information about how our companies and are actually behaving and whether those blended finance are actually supporting sustainable activities in Brazil and abroad. So that's it. Thank you very much for the interest, and I'm very glad to be here in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rajão, for your presentation. So I will now give the floor to Dr. Carlos Nobre, who joined us. Thank you very much for joining us. Oh, wait, it disappeared, did he? Sorry, I don't see him in the presentators anymore.
Yeah, me neither. Maybe he had an internet connection problem. I don't know.
Well, yeah, it seemed, well, sorry, so we'll not, this is direct, this is a live webinar, so we have to do with this kind of unexpected events. So, well, thank you very much, Mr. Rajão, for providing us this insight. So we will now have a discussion about what happened concretely at the summit and with the involvement of the civil society, with indigenous peoples and local communities, the role they can play and they have played and they can play in the future to move forward the protection of the Amazon and its development. So I thank very much Adriana Ramos for being with us today and to cover this issue. Please, Mrs. Ramos.
Yes. Hello, thank you very much, Agnès. Thanks for the invitation to be here together. It's very interesting to have this discussion after the summit because, in fact, the Amazon Summit established a broad and comprehensive agenda for the region, including the challenge of promoting social participation in regional governance, which has yet to happen since the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization is a governmental forum. And even the summit itself, we had those discussions with civil society previously, but in the summit, there is no participation of civil society. So the establishment of this goal to guarantee participation is something huge. And social participation in general is a central challenge. Still, it's even more critical when we talk about the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in the discussions about the future of the Amazon. Including them in the talks is a crucial step to building the future that we will avoid the tipping point, as Ambassador Corrêa do Lago have said. So, since archaeological research is showing that these people and communities are the responsible for shaping the forest as we know, on thousands of years of traditional management and agriculture systems, we cannot go on without them. And that also raises the issue of these people's role in forest conservation and management. You know, the non-timber forest products and the sustainable chains promote conservation and forest economy with social inclusion, but we still need an understanding of the main assets of the economy of the forest, which goes much beyond the products themselves. No? As Raoni, Rajão said, environmental services are in the basis of this economy of social biodiversity as much as knowledge. So traditional knowledge and environmental services are main assets that indigenous people and traditional communities provide. And we need to guarantee that these aspects are valued and rewarded. Forest products alone never cover the opportunity costs of economic activities that destroy the forest, especially because social and environmental impacts do not appear in economic indicators. So communities manage around 100 different products from the forest. The majority of them are not even known by the markets outside of the Amazon. And this multiple use of the forest is one of the keys to sustainability. So even forest products, if they are produced in a different way than the traditional management that is done can create problems, and we have already seen that, for example, in the acai chain. Acai became a very famous product, but sometimes there are people trying to produce acai outside of the forest, so we have to take a look on that. Indigenous territories and protected areas cover over 50% of the Pan-Amazon in all countries. So supporting the development of the life and management plans for these territories and the consultation protocols for each people and community is a relevant strategy to strengthen the role of these areas and communities in general. And this is something that sometimes is out of the agenda, so it's important to bring it. And if we recognize the importance of indigenous people and local communities for the region, one topic we need to strengthen in the agenda is the recognition of these people's territorial rights. Unfortunately, in Brazil especially, the status quo, represented by the Rural Caucus in the Brazilian Congress, promotes a direct attack against indigenous, quilombolas, and traditional communities' territorial rights, threatening all efforts for the regional sustainability. There is also considerable pressure to open these territories to mining and crop production, going against the road to keep the forest stand. So the transition to the new inclusive and sustainable development in the Amazon demands enormous changes. We have to be open to all the innovation that we need to raise. And the summit statement is a good roadmap to put it on track, but keeping the political will in place is perhaps the main challenge, as Raoni said also. And this is one of the reasons to guarantee social participation in the processes. We need to have the direct beneficiaries of all these policies getting together in the discussion in the table, especially because there are very different ways of seeing the region, and they all have to be shaped through a huge discussion. Of course, cities are also a very important topic, and especially because we have to understand that the majority of people is inside the cities, so we have to have solutions for them there. The rural area of the Amazon, the forest areas of the Amazon will not handle with all the unemployment that we have in the region, for example. There are many researchers, especially within the Amazonia 2030 research project, showing that we must raise demands in services, investments in the cities, because there is no employment in the rural area in the Amazon, and deforestation has not increased, the economic indicators. So I think that it's very interesting to discuss the future of the Amazon based in the summit statement, because a lot that have to be done is already there, but we have to strengthen the political participation so that the political will to make it happen also keep on track. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adriana, for this insight. So I think it also gives us very interesting points to discuss further in the panel discussion. And I think the participants to start asking questions, just please use the Q&R button with a little question mark. It's easier to track than the general webinar conversation, but I take note of your questions and we'll raise them a bit later. So then I will give the floor to my colleague Juliette to talk about the financing issues mainly. I think it will also echo nicely some points Adriana just raised. So Juliette, you have the floor, and I think you also have some slides to share.
Yes, thank you very much, Agnès. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I'm really happy to be here today for this webinar on the Amazon. So I will try first to share my screen if I can. And please let me know if you have it full screen. Is it okay?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you so much. So I'm Juliette Landry. I work at IDDRI. I'm a research fellow on international biodiversity governance. And I'm going to try to talk about challenges and opportunities to fund the protection of the Amazon. Because as you may know, financing the protection of important biomes and ecosystems depends on economic and financial situations at local, national, regional, and global scales, and often requires system-wide transformations. Regarding the Amazon, financing its protection against deforestation and degradation can be a success factor, and conversely, a limiting factor if it's not happening properly. So here I'm going to briefly present this few challenges and opportunities to fund the Amazon based on recent literature and a non-exhaustive overview of existing mechanisms and future needs in a few minutes. So first, what is the state of the financial gap? What is at stake for the Amazon rainforest and its people? So the protection of ecosystems of biomes and ecosystems is crucial for the Amazon basin, and conservation areas are today one of the well-recognized tools, as you have seen, to halt deforestation and discourage several economic activities from harming its nature and communities. But there is a question of costs that is interestingly linked to the potential raised by a protected area or conservation by indigenous peoples and local communities, as human resources or communities need financial resources in order to monitor, to control the area, to fight against illegal activities, and for protection, basically, for protection to be effective. For instance, a study in 2008 showed that over the period of 2001 and to 2005, the lack of long-term funding impacted the ability of a protected area to address at least several of the limiting factors. And if the financing of protected areas improved, it would result in greater advances in overcoming other limiting factors. So there are some other studies around protected areas funding deficits. For instance, in the Brazilian Amazon, the average funding deficit is around 89.7% and is much higher actually than other protected areas in Brazil. You can see on the screen on the left. And this is largely due to the fact that management costs are higher in the Amazon because of its larger and remote areas. Now you can see on the right an estimation of future cost for both establishing 1.3 million square kilometers conservation areas, basically 80% of the Brazilian Amazon, and managing all of those areas annually. The Brazilian Amazon would need between 1.7 and 2.8 billion. And I would also like to point out the fact that financial data is scattered and may be missing, so this is also something to be improved, of course. But it's not only a question of how much money for conservation. We have seen that also with presentations from earlier presentations about policies, because financing the Amazon also requires to adapt to different situations, as the Amazon basin is a vast territory. It spans over 8 countries. For some areas, for instance, it may be possible to create economic benefits locally. There are some buffer zones or areas where ecotourism can happen, and those areas would need maybe less grants from international funds or other financial mechanisms, but still may receive other types of financial incentives. But from some other areas, financing conservation can not only rely on self-financing alone. There are remote areas where we have seen that long-term restrictions are needed because they are considered as those areas are considered as a global safety net. Some other areas, again, are home for indigenous peoples and local communities, and the type of finance or assistance they need, which are both capacities and resources, are needed. Restoration, as you can see on the map, is also an important element and requires increasingly important financial resources to restore degraded ecosystems in the Amazon. What is difficult now is that scales and instruments are to be coordinated to ensure consistency, and also to ensure that there is no gap in funds that are needed now and in the future. So we also have to bear in mind that it's not only about financial costs, but also a question of policies, as I said, to be implemented. And there is also a political cost in declaring an area off limits. There is a recognition today that we need a holistic approach to finance. We need to, of course, pay to give more money for expanding protected areas, to finance indigenous peoples and local communities, to control, to finance rangers, etc. But this is not enough. We also need to prevent pressures from the outside as a driving source, as a pressure that leads to deforestation and degradation, for instance, agriculture and unsustainable supply chains, both nationally, regionally, and globally. And large economic benefits are now going mainly to the large agro industry. So we need to create alternative income revenues and incentivize towards a nature positive, climate resilient, and low carbon communities pathways. And to do so, harmful subsidies and incentives, as you can see on the right, must be reduced, because this is really a huge amount of money, and that should be reformed, at least to take into account environmental and social safeguards. To finance the Amazon, where does the budget comes from? There is indeed a rich palette of mechanisms and instruments to fund the Amazon, as the Amazon has both irrecoverable carbon, as you can see on the map on the left, high species richness, so biodiversity in the middle, and also indigenous lands on the right. So can we classify those instruments? It's actually a difficult issue, because funding the Amazon is a climate finance question, a biodiversity finance question, and also a social and development questions. So for instance, the Climate Change Fora at the international level recognizes the fact that developed countries should support the protection of carbon sinks via direct grants, but also with other mechanisms, such as the well-known voluntary carbon offsets to reduce emissions from forest deforestation and degradation, selling credits from carbon sinks to give values to rainforest, even if this mechanism has recently been really criticized because of low standards and an actual lack of reduction of emissions compared to what was expected. And as I said in the beginning of this presentation, it's a biodiversity finance question as well. So giving more integrity to carbon credits is more and more discussed, but there are specific mechanisms and instruments to fund conservation, sustainable use, and access and benefit sharing resulting from the use of genetic resources, which are the three objectives of the UN Convention on Biodiversity. And this is also a development issue, question of poverty, access to health, etc., because we need to fund indigenous and community-led conservation programs in order for this climate and biodiversity finance to be properly anchored in local realities. And often development finance for indigenous peoples in the Amazon can be environmental finance, because we have this example of gold mining, which is using mercury and affects both the environment and the health of indigenous peoples and local communities. So you can see we have both environmental and development finance issue. And we have to take into account the fact that future costs and risks can be expected if we are not funding the Amazon now, because, for instance, the World Bank estimated that $184 billion for Brazil in terms of financial cost by 2050, in terms of water supply, risk for water supply, for the production of energy, and so some other important ecosystem services provided by the Amazon and other ecosystems. So destabilized and extreme weather events regionally and nationally. So this is, of course, greatly linked to adaptation finance and as well, and loss and damage to be integrated in this discussion for financing funding the Amazon. And in terms of mechanisms and instruments, so there is no silver bullet to solving the financial gap for the Amazon. It needs to happen at different scales and for various situations, as you have seen, so taking into account local and national needs and constraints. So here on this slide, you will see a few mechanisms and instruments that have been established. One really famous mechanism is the Grid Climate Fund, which is linked to the UN Convention on Climate Change. For the Amazon, until now, they have funded 671 million for the Amazon through an Amazon Bioeconomy Fund for sustainable small and large bio businesses across the Amazon. And there is also an Amazon Fund, which is a local fund. And now this is a national fund, sorry, but it has been receiving funds from international donors from Norway, from Germany, and now we have received more pledges from developed countries. We also have international biodiversity financial mechanisms, with the most famous one being the Global Environmental Fund, the GEF, and its newest Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, which has just been established. And we are expecting those funds to be largely financing the Amazon, because Brazil and other Amazon countries are the largest recipient countries from those funds. We also have many national and regional mechanisms and federal mechanisms. You can see on the slide, and other multi-stakeholder initiatives, philanthropies, etc. And we also have a rich palette of financial instruments, meaning that some mechanisms are using various instruments, financial instruments, grants or loans or taxes or markets. So all of this shows that it is absolutely necessary to better coordinate all of these instruments and mechanisms, so that they all go in the same direction and work in coherence for the Amazon, bearing in mind that there is the risk of non-additionality, which is that some mechanisms should not replace others. And to finish, we need to anchor this in the international, going back to the international agenda after Sébastien Treyer, IDDRI's executive director, have been introducing the international agenda with the COPs, with other important discussions. So we don't want to divert, of course, the problem of deforestation to other countries. So we know that concerted efforts are required at more high level, general levels of governance, where the question of the Amazon should be more central, as well as other crucial biodiversity hotspots and carbon sinks. So it's not a surprise, but it's worth underlining that financing the Amazon is discussed as part of climate and biodiversity COPs. The issue of developed country responsibilities is high on the agenda for both arenas. We have seen for the COP15 on biodiversity, we have the target 19 on the how much developed countries should give to developing countries in order to for them to conserve and sustainably use biodiversity. And we also have this famous 100 billion climate commitments and needs to be addressed. Civil society also expects more concrete commitments on deforestation from all of the countries in the world, and as a logical continuation of the Bele Declaration. And also, this is part of a broader context on debts and reform of international financial institutions. Maybe you have heard about this global new financing pact that has been discussed as part of this Paris summit in June, being about the question of the debt and the fact that developing countries in the South are more and more, they cannot adapt to those challenges with the current international financial institutions. So there are many milestones you can see on this timeline, and they must carry a momentum for more recommendations, commitments, and concrete pledges, including G20, the IMF and World Bank fall meetings, spring meetings, and we also have the Summit of the Three Basins happening in October this year. Another important event would be the G20 in Brazil in July. And finally, we all, of course, know about the COP30 happening in Bele. And another important day would be this expert reports on depth, nature and climate, which is expected for COP29. So all of this should help driving the momentum towards financing the Amazon. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions and for a discussion with all of the panelists.
Thank you very much, Juliette. So I think we're gone through the different presentations and we'll be able to open the discussion panel. So I'm sorry because I announced Dr. André could join us, but actually it seems that he had really big connection issues and he sent his apologies to all. So sorry for that. So thank you for your contributions through the discussion. So we can have the questions now. I may start with one. I will try to bundle your questions, so bear with me for that. And also feel free to keep reacting through the tool. So maybe a first question relates to fighting agriculture expansion and agriculture leading to deforestation. So a question that could be summarized is as follows. So basically for you as panelists, what are the challenges in ensuring that agriculture converges towards sustainable practices? And there was more specifically a question about supply chains. So how do the agriculture practices at the production level in Brazil, what can they do? What are the challenges and what can they do? But also, for example, taking the example of French agribusiness companies, what can also they do to ensure deforestation-free supply chains, and what needs to happen on the ground in the Amazon for these companies to also have virtuous supply chains? And I see, Raoni, that you turned on your camera, and I think you would be a first person I would turn to address this question. So if you have some minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the question. I think the key challenge here is transparency and information. And well, to be fair, companies have been moving forward in this direction. They have been trying to improve and to adopt better practices in terms of buying, as to avoid buying products linked to deforestation. But the main source for data, which could allow, for instance, company to know whether they are buying something with deforestation, without deforestation, is actually owned by the government. It's not owned by companies. So there has been a lot of promises and quite often leading to products which cannot really deliver because they depend on the farmer confessing to the company they have been buying from deforestation or not, and often with nice names such as blockchain and others, while there has been not enough emphasis in strengthening governmental initiatives which are already in place. And for instance, the Federal Prosecutor's Office have been doing a great job in assessing independently whether big slaughterhouses have been buying from deforestation or not. That is a fantastic starting point to move on the debate on how to clean deforestation from supply chains. The same thing at state level. So we have, for instance, the states of Pará and Minas Gerais, who also have been developing their own systems. And finally, at federal level, in the context of PPCDAM, so the National Plan to Control Deforestation, the Amazon, one of the objectives is the development of a governmental traceability system to improve exactly those levels of transparency. So, and said that, I think the main challenge here is that the majority of agricultural production in Brazil is already deforestation free. But as long as those which are deforesting and which are producing are able to sell their products and then get money to do more deforestation, it's going to be very hard to stop illegal deforestation in Brazil. So that's why it's very important to increase transparency throughout and take out, the so-called rotten apples from the agricultural sector.
Thank you very much. So except if Adriana or Juliette have a specific point on that, I just checking, I don't see them nodding. So I suggest we can go towards another question. And someone asked us why there was no representative of indigenous peoples and local communities in the discussion. So I must say that at least, well, for IDDRI, this is also new grounds that we're exploring. So this is to start the thinking of these national pathways for development and biodiversity conservation. But I would like to give a floor maybe to Adriana. I think you work very closely with indigenous peoples and local communities, and this question actually raises the one of what is meaningful participation and representations, including in big organizations like the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, or maybe even at lower levels. So do you have any thoughts on that point?
Yes, thanks, Agnès. Well, I think that this raises to us some of the challenges we have to provide broad participation. And I think that language, for example, is one key topic, you know. We are speaking in English, we don't have translation, so it would be very hard to have, for example, especially in Brazil at least, you know, indigenous representatives that could take part in a discussion held in English. And I think that this is also a challenge that we have seen in the summit, because although we say that we have this common language, which is the Portuñol, you know, it's not that easy, especially for indigenous people that normally speaks both Portuguese or Spanish as a second language, you know, to be able to have this kind of discussions. So I think that this shows us the gap that we have to fill if we really want to guarantee a real effective participation, you know. So it's a good point to highlight and to have always in mind, because this is one of the things that we have to think when we provide discussions like that.
Thank you very much. I have a question maybe more for Juliette, and I think one of the questions was actually questioning the relevance of financing what we could call the nature-based solution. Some people call it that way, but how do we see the financing options for protecting the forest or restoring the forest compared to other measures such as carbon dioxide removal, for example? And isn't there a risk of greenwashing when we're just all doing these credit systems?
Sorry, I haven't seen that question in the chat, or maybe is it yours more specifically? So the question is basically, is it more greenwashing to do nature-based solutions than carbon dioxide removal? Which is kind of, sorry, I didn't get the question.
Yeah, no, so I think this is about the fact that we say we're selling carbon credits just based on the protection of the Amazon it could be seen as greenwashing. And I think some points mentioned about the international finance mechanism can be seen as that. So I guess the question behind can be whether we have any kind of safeguards against this greenwashing.
So for carbon credits, it has been super criticized recently. I think it came from an idea that it comes from a great an honest intention of trying to give value to the forest and then instead of degrading and deforest this rainforest in the Amazon, will have more values given to the forest and being in place. But at the same time, it has been created this market, and this market has been recognized as living on poor standards. So I think this criticism is actually a great thing, because we don't want carbon credits that are of bad quality, and we don't want carbon credits that do not take into account the integrity for biodiversity and ecosystems, and for social and development issues. That this money should go also directly to the local communities that are safeguarding this forest. So the question of integrity comes more and more higher in the agenda when it comes to voluntary carbon offsets. However, it should not. I think it should not. Financing the Amazon should not only based on those financial mechanisms. And as I said in my presentation, there is a palette of instruments and mechanisms that are in place, and also grants are needed, direct grants to the ground. The incentives, or the types of incentives, should be implemented, as well as taxes, for instance, are newest ideas that come to the table. And maybe we should also think more holistically about what kind of economies we want for of course for the Amazon, but this is the case also for Europe, for France, and for other countries. Yeah, if that's answered the questions, because I don't know if I get it right.
Well, me neither. I tried to put together several comments in the chat, but yeah, I think it was also an important point, because this is something we often hear in discussions on that topic. I have a question that I would like to address maybe to all the three panelists, because you may have different perspective, which is about the role of scientific and technological cooperation at this level, so at the regional level of the Amazon. So I think the question may be related to the Amazon Cooperation Treaty itself, but also maybe we can expand to the Convention on Biological Diversity Conference of Parties and the ones on climate that were mentioned by Juliette. So basically, I think the question is more what support these international organizations can provide to research and to scientific cooperation at the regional or the global level. Maybe I can also extend the question to Adriana about just the cooperation in knowledge out of the usual scientific system, but also the cooperation for exchange of knowledge, of traditional knowledge by indigenous peoples and local communities. So I don't know whether you want to cover this as part of different areas of your work. Maybe Mr. Rajão, do you have any thoughts also on the data you work with? Generally, do you exchange with your counterparts internationally, or even just at the Amazon scale?
I think I can start just to say briefly that I think that building a new innovative approach on intercultural science is one of the main challenges that we have. The science panel of the Amazon tried to start a process like that by inviting several indigenous and quilombola researchers to be together in the panel. And I think that we have to improve that. And as finance, we have to innovate to guarantee that we can do so. Whenever we talk about including indigenous people and traditional people in general, it seems that we have to change our structure to allow this participation to be effective. So we have to be open to innovating this. And I think that in science, it will be the same. We have to recognize this and this intercultural knowledge building as something that needs to be innovated, that has to be has to have incentives. And normally it won't work in the frameworks that we already have, you know. So this is also something that we have to innovate on.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Raoni, please.
Yeah, thank you. I have been actually trained as a scientist in Europe for most of my life. So I've done my undergrad and then my master's and my PhD in Italy and then in the UK, and my as a professor, then back in Brazil, it has been mostly very internationalized. And I can tell that, you know, Brazil definitely has the means, has scientific means to move forward with its agenda, especially in terms of deforestation monitoring and and the monitoring of the impact of deforestation, the monitoring of supply chains, amongst others. And I think there is a significant role for even more cooperation with different countries, but most importantly, they must start from a basis of mutual respect. I think quite often, European researchers and institutions, they depart from the notion that Brazil does not have the capabilities, and here allows the solution, while especially in this agenda, Brazil has more capabilities than most countries, including northern countries. So I think there is a lot of room for cooperation and for further, and for basically having more synergies together. But I think it's important also for mutual capabilities to be better recognized in this process.
Thank you very much. I wonder, Juliette, whether you have any views. You're involved at the Convention on Biological Diversity as well. Do you see how such international processes can also support the work of researchers on the ground? And I wonder whether the reverse is true as well, and how the research can support these international summits and initiatives.
I must say that I don't have many ideas about how those international meetings can help researchers on the ground, but maybe the other way around. The fact that what I hear from partners or researchers I work with is that there are some research that is still really based on the same cultural frameworks, I would say, and that maybe we would need more a diversity of ways of working, of values being included in the discussion. Both, so I work on biodiversity governance, so I know that this is the case for IPBES, and it's more and more important for IPBES, for researchers that are working on IPBES assessment, to include more and more researchers from developing countries, from other value systems, etc. And that will bring more reality and more to what is decided at the international level. So both at the IPBES, in the IPBES fora, but also at the CBD, at the Convention on Biological Diversity. And I think for the biodiversity fora, this is something that is more and more taking into account. I don't know about the climate fora, which I know a little bit less, but I think this is also the case, and we know that traditional knowledge, of course, is one important topic, and should be safeguarded and should be strengthened and enhanced in those discussions. And I also think that more and more capacity building programs are needed, and sometimes they come from international agreements, such as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which has been creating a network of capacity building centers all over the world, and we hope that they will take into account this important parameter, but also other capacity building programs for researchers, more ad hoc, I would say, programs.
Thank you very much, Juliette. So I think I have maybe a last question, which can also be your concluding words for the participants, for the panelists, if you want the three of you to react. I think there's a question, I think, which underlines actually the values that are held for the territory of the Amazon, because the question is whether land use intensification would not actually be a solution to protect the Amazon, and this may echo the wider discussion of land sharing versus land sparing. So from what we hear from the summit, personally, I interpret it as a way of having a land sharing vision where, and especially with the local communities, who can also find a way to develop economic activities that are also aligned with their current way of life, which is very much in favor of sustainable use and protection. But do you hear alternative voices in Brazil, and how do you negotiate the fact that this vision now is promoted, and how will you reconcile the other visions that other stakeholders may have on the ground? This is not an easy question. This is the final one.
Well, I may start here.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Raoni, go ahead, and then Adriana. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think first of all, I think prior to start talking about land sharing and how forest and agricultural production can be together, and I believe Adriana has lots to talk about that. I would like just to mention land sparing for a moment, because I think they are separate processes, and they are not alternatives. And why do I say that? Because there has been a lot of emphasis in academia and a lot of debate, and also in policy, that if you incentivize agricultural production, so basically you help cattle ranchers become more productive, you will automatically lead to reductions in deforestation. And this has not been the case, because if you make cattle ranching more lucrative, more profitable, without closing the agricultural frontier, which is made mostly of public lands, you are basically allowing people to have more money to deforest public lands and then to implement cattle ranching, and then move on. And indeed, the evidence we have right now shows that intensification comes after the reduction of land availability, after we have closed the frontier and prevented people from illegally deforesting new lands. And this process is extremely important in Brazil, because the main reason why people deforest in the first place is not to produce more food, because there are plenty of lands in Brazil which can produce more food. There is plenty of opportunities for cattle intensification and for agricultural intensification. But the main reason is actually lands, because there is so much available land, cheap land, both public and private, that is much more lucrative to deforest the lands, sometimes illegally, as in the case of Cerrado, and then sell it for huge profits, than to take some degraded land and to put it to better use. So I think, first of all, we need to basically dismantle this thesis that intensification automatically leads to conservation, because that's definitely not the case in Brazil.
Thank you very much for your views. Adriana, you had also some thoughts to share.
Yeah, no, I think that Raoni have covered all. What I think it's important to highlight is that we have all met in Belém last month, and we are here because of the importance of the Amazonian forest, so our efforts must be to keep the forest stand. We are not here to find solutions for economic activities that doesn't depend on the forest. We have to find solutions for the forest stand, and the Brazilian legislation already establishes the way the land can be used. So if we follow the legislation, especially in the areas that are already opened, there is a lot to be developed in terms of economic development based on that kind of land use. But we are talking about keeping the forest that still stand there, in a sense that it can play the role that we all recognize the forest have. So different discussions with different approaches. And getting the opportunity to say thank you again. And we have been working a lot with this Pan-Amazon approach in our network of socio-environmental information, HISC, which I invite all the participants here to take a look at our website, because there is a lot, not only about the Brazilian Amazon, but about the whole Amazon that can help in these discussions.
Thank you very much, Adriana, and that actually gives me an opportunity to remind everyone that we will post the recording of the webinar online, and there will also be resources, so we can also include the resource you just mentioned for all participants. Juliette, I don't know whether you have views on this land sharing or land sparing issues, but maybe I would just like to give you the opportunity to give some closing words as well.
So I have this responsibility of giving closing words. No, I just want to say that I think the Amazon Summit was a great initiative, and I think it was needed in order for more cooperation regionally. And I think regional cooperation is much more needed in not only in the Amazon but also in other important biomes, in other basins of the world that are important to be safeguarded. So I must recognize that this is a first step, and I think it's only the beginning. There are many international events that I hope would give a little bit more concrete commitments towards towards the Amazon and other ecosystems, including at COP28 in a few months, where I hope the global stocktake may give us some lessons about the state of both financial issues, but other items that are super important to discuss. And I think, yeah, that's pretty much all for me. Thank you very much also for your participation, Adriana and Raoni, and other participants that have already left the discussion. We're really happy to have had this opportunity to hold this webinar with you.
Thank you very much, everyone. So, as Juliette said, we'll keep exploring this issue of developing biodiversity-friendly development and see how also countries can move forward in terms of finding the necessary finance to achieve the biodiversity issues at stake. So, thank again very warmly all our participants, and thank you very much for joining, for your participation. And let's keep exploring the Amazon together. Have a good day in Brazil, a good evening in France.
Bye.